wants to take seats, we'll get started here. And then once you take a seat, I'm going to have you stand and let's say the Pledge of Allegiance, shall we? Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I want to thank David Kerr, who is your North Lake County Superintendent and Principal, for letting us use the facility, and Tracy Fivecoat, who helped us in all the logistics for letting us be here today. I want to recognize Lake County Commissioner James Williams. If you'd stand up, James. You're newly elected Lake County Commissioner. We're delighted to have you here this morning. And Tom Rourke with the Sheriff's Office and his reserve as well. We appreciate you all being here and the service you give to the people of Lake County. You all should have gotten a ticket on the way in, I think. We'll be drawing those out to bring people up to ask questions or make comments. This is my 157th Town Hall meeting since 2012. It's the 9th in Lake County over the last 6 years. We have a lot of incoming. Town halls are a great way to hear from people and respond to questions, but we also obviously get a lot of incoming mail and email and all the various means people can use now on social media. Just to put it in perspective, over the prior 2 years, I responded to 168,000 letters, phone calls, and emails in just that 2-year period, of which 868 came out of Lake County. One of the things we put a lot of effort into, as well as the legislative and policy front, is helping people who have issues and problems with federal agencies and programs. We've assisted 296 residents of Lake County over the years. 87 of those are veterans, and another 44 dealt with Social Security and Medicare. Now, if you have an issue this morning that you'd like to talk about related to a specific case, what we would call casework, an issue you're having with Social Security and Medicare, you don't have to come to the microphone to do that, because those are sometimes kind of personal. I do have staff here in the room, and we'd be happy to meet with you privately afterwards to provide whatever assistance we can. I can just give you an example of the kind of work we do. I worked with the Office of Personnel Management to get a Lakeview man his monthly annuity reinstated, which resulted in the receipt of $6,772 in underpayments. This man was suffering from Alzheimer's and told my office how this payment really helped relieve stress in his life, obviously, and we got him back on a path. That's just one example of many where we help bust through some of the bureaucratic hurdles that are out there to help people get what they earned and deserve. Thought what I'd do at the beginning this morning is just give you a little update on what we've been working on in the Congress this month and last month and the prior 2 years. But I want to save most of the time to hear from you and get your questions. I'll apologize at the head end. I decided to catch a cold about 2 days ago, so hopefully my voice holds out. But I'm here to listen more than talk. So let me just give you a quick update. I don't know how many watched the President give his State of the Union address. I was there. I thought he did a good job reaching out and trying to figure out how we can work together on the issues that confront our country. As many of you may know, I broke with my own party to reopen many of the agencies in the government that have been shuttered, especially the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. While I fully support getting security on the border, I didn't see what BLM workers in Lakeview or Vail or somewhere had to do with that fight, and they're important members of our community. And so I was one of a handful of Republicans that voted to fund those agencies. And ultimately, there is a group meeting this weekend at Camp David. Hopefully, they're making progress to work out an agreement between the President and the Congress on border security that everybody can support. And we can move forward with regular order in terms of funding our agencies and the important work that these folks do. We also passed some needed reforms and something I hear a lot about across our district, and that's a law called the Equal Access to Justice Act. This is a Ronald Reagan era law, frankly, that said you should be able to sue your government, and if you prevail, the government should pay your attorney's fees. Now, in the face of it, that sounds good. The problem is, over time, it got expanded to where nonprofit groups and all now, I think, use it as an ATM. They sue on everything. They almost always get some payment back, and it really bollockses up any legitimate efforts, I think, to get work done. The problem for taxpayers is we don't even know what it costs us because they don't keep records in these agencies. So we passed legislation in the House this year, we've done it before, to call the agencies to keep track of who's getting paid and how much your money's going out the door, because literally they didn't keep track of it. We know it's millions, but we don't know how many, nor do we know who's really getting the money. So I'd like to see some reforms there so that it doesn't become an ATM machine going forward. There are other issues that we've taken up in the last year, and I hope to continue to work on in this new Congress. One deals with wolf predation. We know that the wolf packs are growing. We see these problems with cougars as well. I think we should follow the recommendations of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from 6 years ago and delist the gray wolf and get it back under state management. I know out here what that means for livestock. These wolves are pretty smart, I guess, that they figured out where Highway 395 is, and they know if they step across the line, they're now protected federally, but if they stay on the other side, they're good to go. So anyway, I think it's time to do that. We see the wolf packs going into southern Oregon now and causing havoc down there. And so hopefully we can make progress on that. I would tell you, there aren't that many of us in the Congress that represent districts that are impacted, and there's a lot of pushback from those in the urban areas. So we'll see where that goes, but we're going to continue to work on it. We did get some good forestry legislation as part of reauthorizing the Farm Bill into law that allows for more treatment in these areas to reduce the fuel loads. I worked with our senators in the West to pass legislation that does away with something that was called fire borrowing. And this is where the Forest Service would use its funds in the middle of fire season that were originally intended to do work in the woods to reduce the fuel loads. They would use those monies to pay to fight fire, which meant we never did the fuels reduction work to the extent we should. So beginning in 2020, we put an end to fire borrowing. And I think that will help us try and get ahead of these gigantic fires. But there's so much more work to be done when it comes to forest management. I've been a long time and firm advocate of trying to better manage, be better stewards of our federal forest lands. Making sure we have access to them, reducing these unnatural fuel loads, and trying to more aggressively fight the fires on the federal ground. Do we have that slide on fire starts, Nick? If you can find that. This is interesting data because I've heard this a lot over the years about fires and fire starts on state or private ground versus federal. As you can see from 2017, it was about an equal number of fire starts, whether it was on federal ground or those grounds managed by the Oregon Department of Forestry, which can include private. But when you look at the acres burned, that would be the pie chart on the right, it does make the case that we're losing a lot more federal ground to fire than we are on the state protected ground. And I think that's something we have to look at and ask, why is that? Is it that we're not fighting the fires aggressively enough? Do they let them burn big? Is it the wilderness? We know, do you have that wilderness slide? We know that on the wilderness piece, only, I think it's about 4% of the ground in Oregon is wilderness, but it accounts for about 32% of acres burned. And again, what I hear is they often start there, they don't fight them aggressively, if at all, in the wilderness, and then they burn out. And that seems to be the case according to these data. And then we might talk about the emissions piece on that slide. We know about air quality problems, and for those who suffered through it here this summer or last, As bad as it was here, you should have been down in these basins like the Klamath Basin or the Rogue Valley, where the smoke just, you had the worst air quality there than anywhere in the world other than Beijing at one point. And it went on for weeks. This is not this one, the other one on the emissions, if you've got that one. Because there's a lot of discussion about what are we getting, what's happening to our climate in the air. Well, we know this was the latest data we can find from the U.S. Forest Service and the Environmental Protection Agency. The wildfires in 2015 amounted to the equivalent of 3 million cars, the emissions from 3 million cars, or 3.5 coal plants. And that California wildfires last year, 68 million tons of carbon. That's the equivalent of all the emissions from their electricity generation for the year. So if we want to do something about emissions, if we want to do something about air quality, we need to do something about better forest management and more active fighting of the fires. But let me stop with that. I want to thank you for being out here. There's much more work we can talk about, but I want to hear from you. We did a lot on opioids. We did a lot to help our veterans get access to care in a more timely manner and deal with the drug addiction that we know is killing more people in America than auto accidents, and that's overdose from opioids. But I'm happy to get into those along the way. But why don't we, what I'm going to do is draw tickets out of the barrel here and then ask you one at a time to come up to this microphone. Just tell me who you are and what part of the county you're from. Oh, perfect. So I'll give you the last 4 digits, 4041, 4040, and 4020. So if you've got a question or a comment, come on up. So 4041, 4040, or 4020. And if nobody wants to use those, I'll draw some more. We're not going to compel you to come to the mic this morning. We'll draw some more here. 4037. Man, if these were door prizes, there'd be a 4017. There we go. We have a winner. Good morning.
Good morning. My name's Willie, and I want to refer back to the fires.
Yeah. Can you get a little closer to that microphone? Thank you.
About that. Over the last 10, 12 years, we've had some major fires down here.
Yep.
And when the Forest Service gets involved in those fires, there's locals around here that go in, able to take care of the fires, and then run them off. They tell them that they will be arrested if they drop the blade on that cat or do anything. That needs to come to a stop.
I appreciate that, and I hear that as well. And I've talked to the Forest Service about it. And in fact, several years ago out in Jordan Valley, in that country, we ran into that even with the rural fire districts. And I helped organize some meetings, initial meetings that then took off between the BLM and the local ranchers. They now have forged this really good, solid partnership. And I was out with some of the ranchers this summer, and they've acquired surplus military equipment, big rigs that they put tanks on, the ranchers have. And then they're in a partnership with the BLM, so when fire breaks out, they're all on the same radios, they train together, it's just an added force. And one of my friends out there said we were on one fire and the BLM truck was trying to go through the back country, and they came with their big rig with these military, it's a some military rig. And the BLM firefighters, they said, why don't you guys just go? You seem to be able to get through this better than we are. And they went and they put them out. I'm talking to the Forest Service about 2 issues at the federal, at the national level. You've got to be more aggressive about fighting these fires. And you need to be more in partnership with the local communities. Because, you know, I grew up in small town, Hood River and all. We had volunteer firefighters. People joined, they were trained, and they worked together to put out fires. I'd like to see that same attitude come into the Forest Service. Now, these are deadly, and you've got to be smart about it. But you can fix that with proper training, proper protocols, proper communication. But I've talked to professional firefighting crews who have encountered the same thing. They're under contract, and they sit there with their equipment while they wait for somebody to come and give them approval. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard them tell me it was half an acre, it was an acre. I could have gone in, I could have put it out. By the time we got the go-ahead, it's now 20 acres and the wind didn't come up. And so this is part of what we see on these slides, why these fires are getting so big, that and the added fuel, the natural fuel loads. But that's more forestry, and we've got that in Lake County, but a lot of this is range fire too, that we've got to get on. Now, in the Farm Bill 4 years ago, we put special funds to station crews specifically to deal with range fires where we have sage-grouse habitat. Because the biggest threat to sage-grouse is fire. So there's a crew based out of Burns and elsewhere that their principal mission is to put out those fires rapidly. But to your point, we need to build better communication relationships between federal agencies and the local support on the ground to be a partnership here to get these things out. Half the Forest Service budget now is spent fighting fire. Half. It never used to be that way. Okay, 4003. Oh, perfect.
Thanks for coming out.
Just tell people who you are.
Chad Walden, I'm the shop teacher here at school. Thanks for coming out. I do want to thank you. You've treated me and the FFA students very good and we've come back to DC, and I do appreciate that. My question today is, as you know, this is hate country, and we've been plunged into a tariff war with China, and we are currently having 33% tariffs on hay exports of China. The Constitution explicitly grants Congress the power to impose tariffs, yet that power has been eroded over the generations to the executive branch. President Trump stated in the State of the Union address that he would like you to support him and by supporting the United States Reciprocal Trade Act that gives him unilateral tariff power. There's currently a bipartisan bill that in the Senate sponsored by Pat Rooney, Republican of Pennsylvania, and Mark Ware from Democrat from Virginia, that would bring back the tariff power back to Congress. Are you going to support that, or what's your thoughts on tariffs?
Yeah.
And my big question is it's fine when your president is in power, but when we have a president who we might not agree with so much, then what do we do? Thank you.
No, I appreciate it, and thank you for the work you do with FFA kids. I've had a number of FFA students over the years as interns and eventually as staff, and I'll tell you what, they're the best young people that we hire. And I'm looking forward to speaking at the FFA convention in Redmond coming up here in a few weeks. Let me tackle the issue of tariffs. You are right, the power has been ceded to the executive. Congress does that too much in every category, frankly. And so the president's using something called Section 232 authority, which deals with national security. And no president's used it like President Trump has. So that's number one. Two, the legislation you referenced to take power back from the executive would require the same executive that's grabbed the power to agree to give it up. And I haven't met a president yet of either party who ever wants to give up power and restore it. So the key is we have to be careful about ever delegating more power to the executive branch. Three, on tariffs itself. We've been in a tariff war since before World War II. And certainly we have, across the board, other than New Zealand, the lowest tariffs and barriers of any country on the planet. So we've been in one, we've never fought back. Now the problem with tariffs is they are a tax on consumers. That's who ends up paying it with higher prices. And they can affect, clearly, trade. But the president decided to use those as a big stick to get these countries to come to the table to negotiate better deals. And clearly we need to change some of these agreements. Now, he was successful with South Korea, and we got that one done. He's been successful with the new Canadian and Mexico trade agreement that now Congress should ratify. I do not support giving any executive more power in this area, to answer your question directly, but I do support holding these countries to the agreements that they made with the United States. And unfortunately, the way the World Trade Organization structure is currently configured, we don't have much ability to push back. And by the way, the Chinese cheat, and always have. And they steal, and they always have. And I'm not China-phobic here, I'm just telling you the facts. I know from briefings what they're doing in the cyber world and what they're doing in other places. So I'm glad he's pushing back because we're seeing some of those results. Now, we were talking about hay exports from here, and a lot of it goes to, where'd you tell me, Taiwan, South Korea, and into Qatar, among other places. And those seem to still be flowing okay. But it does give me pause. I want to see these agreements get inked before too long, because it hurts us too when you do these tariffs. And we lose markets if we're not careful. And so it's not going to be an open timeline here. But I do think these countries have to come back to the table, just like I think the NATO countries needed to pay their 2% share of NATO, which they weren't doing. American taxpayers were having to cover the whole bill, or most of it. So it's an interesting approach. But I'd like to see it get resolved, because I'm not a big fan of tariffs. 4012. 4012. 4025. 4005. We have a winner. Perfect. Come on up to the microphone there. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm going to lead into something.
Tell everybody who you are and where you're from.
I've been to South Dakota once in my life, and they have the most beautiful forests in the nation.
Yep.
And I didn't hear you mention about logging. I think that logging should proceed. And what they did out there on Highway 31, I think is a travesty. The way they did that so-called controlled burn, killed a lot of trees and made them look ugly and that kind of thing. Those trees should have been selectively logged out rather than burned. And therefore, when you do that kind of logging, you can clean up all the bad underbrush and growth and reduce the fire danger that way.
Yeah, and it's just an oversight on my part, because I support logging, I support forest management, I support thinning. Look, it's a balance, and forests are not static, right? They keep growing, they keep dying, and that's that fuel load I'm talking about. And we used to have a pretty good way of life in Eastern Oregon, where people can work in the woods, work in the mills, have a good life, and we can pay for our schools and our roads, and things went pretty well. And now you see the biggest economic activity in the forest is fighting fire, making lunches for firefighters. And that seems backwards to me. And I think we should be able to move forward and have active forest management, which includes logging, which includes thinning, which includes biomass, which, there's a lot we can do with forest products. We don't have to go back to the days of the wigwam burners and all. We now have technology that allows us to use every piece of that tree in a productive way that can create revenue. But when most of these sales get litigated, back to my equal access to justice issue, and people get paid to litigate these cases and stop the activity, the forest continues to grow and die. And now all we're left with is horrible air quality, destroyed habitat, and a huge taxpayer bill, and forests that are blackened. And then the other part, why don't we go in after these fires and remove the burned dead trees where appropriate while they still have value? The Federal Forest Service is the only place that doesn't happen. I remember a few years ago I was down at Black Butte Ranch. There had been a fire come out of that wilderness area. It got on the ranch and it got on the Forest Service lands. And this was a month or so afterwards, and we were doing a little briefing, and some of the media was there. And it was hard to hear because on the ranch property, they were running the chainsaws and equipment taking down the burned trees. Forest Service said it'd take them a year to plan. Another year to get it out there for comment, and then it would be appealed. It'd be year 3 before they anticipated any activity. And already on the private side, and I guarantee you on tribal lands, they move rapidly. In the state of Oregon, generally speaking, moves more rapidly. And the Forest Service lands, not because of the managers, the people in the offices, but because of the laws and the rules and the litigation. That's what we need to change. So last year in the House, we passed legislation that would allow an expedited process to go in and remove burn dead trees while they still have value. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a West Coast senator to support me on that. There was no support. The Alaskans, yes, but nobody along the Pacific, and we couldn't get it through the Senate. They blocked it. And I just think we'd have better policy if we went in. If you think about if it was your backyard and you had a fire, you'd cut down the burned trees, you'd chop them up, you'd either firewood or log them out or whatever, and you'd plant a new forest or a new tree. It seems like common sense, but that's an ingredient often missing in Washington. Let me draw a couple more. 4039, 4034. Somebody's got these out here. These aren't the ones from Bend, are they? No. 4019. Perfect. Come on down. The next one would be 4043, by the way. Good morning.
We were talking about in this fire suppression and the like. I was born and raised over in the valley country, the Mother Road River.
Oh, yeah.
Over there, before the Forest Service and the state got involved with firefighting, there's time the smoke went up. They didn't wait for the Forest Service or anybody else. There were loggers, farmers, and everybody that had a piece of equipment. And we'd haul them, we had it out there. And a lot of times before the state or the federal, either one, showed up, the fire was already under control. And now you go out and like the gentleman said, you go out and try to even help the people that were in control of the federals mainly. Then they threaten to have you arrested and everything else. I had one experience where we were at Pine, where I lived for 25 years. We had a fire broke out on the back of the subdivision. Well, before the state or anybody else showed up, there was about a half a dozen, myself and my wife and neighbors were over there. We had the thing trailed in control before anybody showed up. And the same thing happened there. I think this was a state truck with a white rig. And they threatened to have us prosecuted for fighting fire on private land on the subdivision. Well, we told them where they could take their pickup and go. And fortunately, they left when it was home again. But we already had the fire under control and I was eventually put out in 4 or 5 hours. But the same thing has happened time and again this summer, for instance, over east of here. I think he mentioned it.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, my uncle was a fire boss for the Forest Service out of the Wallowa equipment in the, I want to say, 60s and 70s, and he would tell similar stories about, you went out there, he would recruit the loggers and their equipment when he'd show up. So I'd get a group of the loggers who were out there and their equipment, we'd go put it out. Even if that meant working all night down the ridge line, we'd cut the line in and we'd have it out by morning.
Right.
And it seems, I hear these stories all too often about how they wait until they do their briefings in the mornings and then the wind begins to come up, gets hotter, drier before they get out on it. I don't know, but I sure hear that a lot.
Yeah. And I guess the second thing I'd like to mention is the air quality control. Up until this summer, I'd be 89 here the whole month, and I'd hardly ever been bothered with any kind of allergy. But something in this smoke that came in here about a month into it, it's like I've had a remnants of a bad cold ever since, coughing, stuff coming up. And then on top of the forest fires that they have in California and here, then the state or forest service or whoever starts burning trash right on the tail end of that. So we have the smoke problem twice. And I think that is about the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, that was an issue I raised with the heavy forest service as well, I understand they put these big boxes around these fires, and some of them they say, well, we were going to burn in there anyway or whatever. I said, I got that. But when you do that in August,
Yeah.
and that smoke is trapped in these basins, you're not taking into account the effect on human health. I did a hearing in the committee I used to chair, the Energy and Commerce Committee, last fall. We had researchers from a couple of universities tell us that 2,500 to 25,000, pretty big range, of people die prematurely every year because of inhaling wildfire smoke. And so if you've got asthma, COPD, something like that, or now look at your situation, it creates a problem. And so we know it's a human health issue.
And then another thing I guess I might as well complain about too is the attitude, especially the Forest Service has in cleaning up this trash, the natural accumulation that takes place over a quarter century or whatever. And I know places over east of here that debris is on the ground. Some places lies at 20 feet deep.
Yeah.
In the timber. It's been dead for a couple decades, a lot of it, you know. And if they would give people, instead of charging them $10 a cord for wood permit, and limited to 4 cords, if they would give sale permits for 1 or 2 people, 5, 10, 20 acres, to go in and clean that up free, maybe with a stipulation that when they clean it, they would stack the debris that they cut off these trees, so as they'd be easily burned during the winter months or picked up and chipped, or something like that, make them so that they'd be.
Good idea. Yeah.
Marketable.
No, I agree. It's a good idea. We used to have these kinds of partnerships. It seems to me like, and so we need to rethink how our forests are not being managed the way they should be. And that fuel load is what causes, in part, these catastrophic fires.
Right.
And we know after the fires, if you don't remove the dead fuel load, they're likely to burn again and burn hotter and do more destruction to the soils. Plus, they pose a physical hazard to firefighters. We lost a firefighter this last year. I think it was in Northern California from a snag from a prior fire that came down on it. And so it makes it dangerous to go in and fight the fires, so then they don't. They burn hotter again, and you do more destruction to the soils.
You know, I guess for now, that's my major gripe, so.
Well, that's a pretty good list. Thank you. 4043, yes, sir. Come on, man. Good morning. And again, just tell me who you are and where you're from.
My name is Leon Baker. I'm from Silver Lake.
Perfect.
Thank you for coming down. I'm sure you had an enjoyable trip for Ben this morning.
It wasn't too bad.
Good.
It wasn't too bad.
Good.
Getting back to the river tonight may be the challenge.
I'd like to ask 2 questions, if I may, please. The motto of this country is "In God We Trust." And we've all heard the egregious stories of Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry selling baby parts. Do we expect God to continue to bless this nation when we allow that kind of activity to continue in our nation?
Right.
Second of all is regarding gun rights. Seems to be a focus on the gun itself rather than the cause, the people who use those. Some of them are mentally ill. Is anything being done to look at the causes of the human activity in the drug industry, mental illness, whatever it might be? Guns in this area are a tool, and many people need them, especially with the wolf coming, mountain lion coming. They are a tool for us, and we need that to protect not just our animals at times, but our families. And I don't think anybody really understands that outside of this area.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you. On the first part, it was actually 2-3 years ago when that issue came forward about the sale of baby parts that the Speaker Baker at the time put together a special task force to investigate that. And members of the committee I chaired were part of that task force and issued a pretty scathing report on that situation. And to your point, the latest series of issues that are out there, I don't know if you saw in Virginia, the governor talked about post-birth abortion, which we would know as infanticide, which is just a horror in my mind. You would comfort this child if it was still alive after being aborted and then make a decision what to do after that. This is, I'll just say, evil. And so I'm just stunned. So we have tried to pull a bill out of committee to pass to prevent, born alive abortion, basically. And that was blocked by the Democrats in the House just this last week. And so we're trying, but we don't have votes now. Elections have consequences. On guns, two things. Every 2 years, thanks to voters, I'm allowed to raise my hand and swear an oath of office and an allegiance to protect and defend our Constitution. That includes the First Amendment, speech, and the Second, freedom of religion, and the Second Amendment, and all the other amendments. And I take that oath very seriously. On the issue of mental health and gun violence, two things. We did clear the way to do more studies on that, which I think is important. And second, we rewrote the mental health laws in America for the first time since John Kennedy literally signed the last bill before he was tragically assassinated into law. That hadn't been done since the 60s. And part of our focus was to look at the causes of violence and what we need to do to provide treatment. To your point, we know that many people who have engaged in these activities are suffering some sort of mental issue as well. We know we have a lack of those services in our community, so we rewrote these laws and put money behind them to get more mental health services in our community, to help our law enforcement in our schools do active shooter training so they know what to do when confronted with this, and try to address it that way. In a number of these horrible shootings, the guns were either acquired legally or stolen. And so there are already many laws on the books that aren't properly enforced. We passed the law last Congress called Fix NICS, the National Background Check System, because it turns out states were not putting the information in the federal background check system we have, when they identified people that shouldn't have access to a weapon. And the military was not complying either. So we were trying to enforce the laws that are on the books. Now they're coming forward with some proposals that are pretty confiscatory. Literally, if you and I went out to a gravel pit here under what's being proposed in the House to do target practicing, and I handed you my 7mm, you and I would both be felons, because before I can loan that gun to you, we would have to go to a licensed gun seller and do background checks. Now, how's that going to work in a place like Eastern Oregon? I mean, that's just one of the minor points, but they're trying to push this stuff through. And coupled with what they're talking about in Salem, they're going to set up such a patchwork if they're successful that you cannot not be a felon and live in a rural area. I mean, it's just going to be that complicated. So we're trying to push back and address the underlying problem that I see, like you, I think, which is how do we help the person that's carrying? Because if it's not a gun, we've seen people do it with a car. We've seen people now do it with knives. They'll find another weapon. And so we have to deal with this violence issue. I had a group of kids in my office last spring, I think. I said, now I'll admit I'm old, I'm 62. And when I was going to high school in Hood River, well, remember I'm dealing with 15, 16, 17-year-olds, so I'm like ancient. I said, when I was going to school in Hood River, if we were going deer hunting or bird hunting afterwards, we had the rifle or shotgun in the back of my 55 Willys Jeep in the gun rack. None of us ever thought about bringing that weapon into the school or the classroom and using it on somebody else. We just never would have thought about that. And I asked these girls, I said, take no offense, but what do you think it is about your generation where we're seeing this happen? And they really didn't have any great ideas, but I don't know if it's social media and the bullying or video games or the change in culture, but something's changed. Where now that seems to be something that how people act out is in violent ways. And I'd like to see us get to that core issue and find a better path forward. The worst fear of any parent would be that a shooter would show up in their child's school. And so there are things we need to do to secure our schools, and there's efforts to help fund that. And then on the mental health and counseling side, I think is really important. 4029. Perfect. Good morning.
I'm Sonny Coleman from Fort Rock.
Morning.
And I'm going to go on a different path here. I want to know your take on our $1 trillion worth of debt, where we're headed to with it, when we're not paying any off, and we're headed further and further into world inflation or world depression, or what your take is on it.
Yeah, thank you for that. So did you all hear the question on the nation's debt, where we're headed? I think we're over $21 trillion in federal debt. This is a huge threat to the future of the country and a huge debt for the next multiple generations. And it's a tough one to tackle because most of the federal budget that we work on, that you're hearing us fight over, is about 1/3 of what gets spent. The other 2/3 are Social Security, Medicare, interest on the debt, and Medicaid. They're called mandatory spendings. They're locked in statute. That's where the bulk of the spending, and it continues to grow. I think we've got a slide on that somewhere. Continues to grow. We have made some changes in some of those programs a couple of years ago that will carve off $2 trillion in debt over time. We're trying to bend those cost curves down. But fundamentally, to balance the budget even this year, you'd have to not fund the Department of Defense, Department of Agriculture, BLM, Forest Service, all the other agencies, and then you might balance the budget. So it's going to take some structural reform, and I think it takes growing the economy as well, and producing jobs here, and the tax revenue that flows from that going forward. But it's a spending problem that we've got to address, and it's tough. Yeah, 21.9, and current estimated budget deficit 850. But there are things that we can move away from, I think, and get back to the states having more responsibility. Not everything needs a federal solution, believe me. So we're trying to work on some of those things. 4004. 4004. 4013. I should have done door prizes. 4009. 4007. 4015. Ah, perfect. Come on up.
Double check my number to make sure I won.
Thanks for coming out this morning, I appreciate it. My name is Earl Diamond. I'm a resident right in between Silver Lake and Christmas Valley. Question I have, I want to go back to the logging piece.
Yeah.
I grew up in Detroit, Oregon. I've done everything there is to do with the tree. I've logged, I've worked in the mills. One of my biggest concerns, and I love your idea, why don't we take the burnt trees and put them in there? But what's going to assure us that those aren't going to just go in a log raft and float to Japan? If we had changed what we do with our timber industry 45 years ago and set up the mills so that they cut a 2x4 to the right length, there's no excuse for us to ever sell anything but a finished board across the pond. And a lot of what we're running into, and the reason we don't have many sports now, and why we lost those mills, is because for years and years and years, it was cheaper to cut it, float it down the river, and send it to Japan. You can go to Longview right now. You can go to the Oregon coast right now. You can see massive rock rafts still going out as unfinished. Why don't we put our own people to work?
Yeah, so on the trees I'm talking about would be on federal land, and there is a prohibition on log export from federal land. today, and there has been. So there is a ban on exporting logs from federal land, and that's what I'm talking about cleaning up. So that would have to run through a mill and could not be. So the logs you're talking about are coming off private land, and that's a little different argument. Frankly, when you're a private landowner, when the government tells you where you can sell your commodity, it could be like saying we should sell all the wheat here in America and not export it unless we process it into flour first. Yeah.
With all due respect, I'm not asking. With all due respect, I'm not asking that they don't sell their logs, but the logs that go across are a finished board.
Yeah. And again, I understand that argument, but I get back to private property rights, and it's your forest, because we're not talking about the federal forest land. There is a prohibition on exporting logs off federal forests. But on the private ground, I think it's a little tougher sell to tell somebody who owns a forest, we're going to make you run that through a mill, even if the market says that you can make more money selling it as a raw log. Okay, I mean and I know you have a different opinion on that.
Well, not necessarily, but most privately owned forest has been bought from the federal government at some point in time. As far as
I don't think so.
You know, when I worked in the mills, I mean, lumber companies would buy tracts. Technically, they owned it at that point. I'm just saying that.
But they can't take those tracts. They would buy the timber sale. They did not buy the land, and they could not take the logs off of federal land and export. Now, if they had their own, they could export those logs, buy the federal logs to run through their mills or whatever. But they cannot take the trees off the federal ground and sell them overseas unprocessed. So really, to me, the division is it's somebody's private forest land. Is it right for the government to tell them what kind of product they can sell off that land? That they can only sell it if it's processed, and I'd struggle with that because, there may not be a market for what they're selling here. There may not be somebody to process it.
I understand that. I guess what I'm getting at is we subsidize so many different things. Why wouldn't we subsidize, mills to retool?
Actually, we do in some cases now. If you look at the facility in Prairie City, that had federal subsidy behind it. We tried that with a program down at Rough and Ready out of Grants Pass down out at Cape Junction, and that one frankly failed. There's an effort now through research through some of our universities on, it's this new, what am I trying to think of here, this cross-laminated. And there's a mill in Douglas County that's getting some federal support to look at cross-laminating where they can take smaller dimensions, glue them together, and come up with a different product. So to your point, we are doing some of that work as well to find new. But I don't disagree with the premise that the more we can do manufacturing here and sell the finished product, the better. Fully agree. Where I draw the line is, am I going to mandate a hay grower that you can't, you got to do hay a certain way or you can't sell it, or wheat growers that you have to process it to flour or you can't sell it. I just struggle with doing that on a private property rights basis. So, but I also know our mills, when markets are strong, are clamoring. You have two different kinds. You got mills that own their own timberlands. There aren't many of those left. And mills that rely on timber off the federal ground who can't get what they need when they need it, who tell me if we could buy the burn dead stuff, we'd do it in a heartbeat. And so that's something I think we could address and should address. Then you wouldn't have this pileup of debris too for the next fire. So, Diane, were you 4004?
Huh?
Were you 4004?
1-5.
Okay, 4004. 4035, 4035, and 4016, 4016. We'll get to everybody here pretty soon. 4026. Perfect. Come on down.
Shark Island and Fort Rock. So in the last few days, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has proposed the Green New Deal, which, if legislation came from that, would pretty much destroy Oregon's agriculture economy, and I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on that.
Well, thanks for keeping an eye on that. Yeah, I don't know if you all have heard about the Green New Deal. It's now available. It's pretty amazing body of work, and what you really needed to see, and she's now taken it down from her website, but it was her frequently asked questions about what she wants to do, and that really shows you what's behind the language of the Green New Deal. And they make statements in there, I don't have them in front of me, but of basically want to get rid of cattle within 10 years, any livestock ranching, because of the, well, I won't use the term she uses, but it starts with an F and ends with a G, and the methane release from that. So they want to deal with that. They'd like to end airline transportation within 10 years, but don't think they can achieve that. High-speed rail will take care of it, and I'm sure that would have helped last night as I flew from Washington to Portland to Redmond, because that high-speed rail, I know. And it's a pretty, big manifesto, and it's, for a while she had a job for everybody, including payment for those unwilling to work. That came down too. But it gives you an insight into where she and that wing of politicians are right now. It's really pretty stunning, and so we're all trying to digest why you would do that or how you get there. Yeah, there are ways to deal with climate change. There's ways to reduce emissions where we can put America first, not last. And we've done a lot of that. Our emissions are back to 1992 levels. And there's work that can be done going forward that'll have our innovation and sell that to the world. And so, but going down her path is basically a socialist takeover of healthcare, the economy. Every building in the U.S. would have to be redesigned. I mean, who's paid for this?
It's socialism, but...
It is, and you may have, did you happen to watch the State of the Union address? And the president said, you know, America will never be a socialist country. And everybody on my side of the aisle stood up and cheered. I was stunned to look over, and not many on that other side of the aisle were doing anything but rolling their eyes. And then they zoomed in on Bernie Sanders and some others that support that. And that's, you know, Bernie Sanders is an honest politician. He actually believes that. And I think AOC is an honest politician. She actually believes that stuff. I just dramatically disagree with them. As somebody who was a small business owner for 20 years, grew up on a cherry orchard in the Dalles and represent a district like this. Well, I mean, we're actually in the middle of a discussion right now because some people want to grow our meat through cell culture. So it'd be in a lab, you know, I'd like a sirloin by tomorrow, so please, you know, put these, you know, grow in the lab. And I think that's their plan, is to rid the planet of surplus animals, if you will, cattle. And they make that clear. They'd like it done in 10 years. They want to get rid of all combustion engines in 10 years too. It's like it doesn't work. And the whole non-carbon, we can reduce carbon emissions. We can do a lot of things in renewable energy and all, but there are consequences when you do that. You're still doing base load. By shifting to natural gas because of American invention and innovation in accessing the natural gas through fracking, that has resulted in 16 gigawatts of coal power coming offline and replaced with natural gas, which ends up being cheaper for consumers and fewer emissions. This is where innovation and American ingenuity can lead the world. And we should do it in these sectors, but the notion of just taxation over regulation brings about economic stagnation. I want innovation, adaptation, preparation. I mean, there's a lot we can do on the positive side here, but we don't have to kill our economy to get there. I don't know. It's a whole different world when you've met a payroll and owned a business versus never having done that or grown up in an area like this and see where food is produced. So thanks for raising the question. 5024, 401, I'm sorry, 402. or 4018, or 4028. 4030. Oh, don't miss your turn. Come on up. Come on up. If I called your number, come on up. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm sure it does. It's okay.
Yeah, just come on up to the mic so they can hear you.
I'm Carrie Crawford. I have the Community Breeze newspaper out here, which serves the Northern County. I live in Christmas Valley.
Excellent.
I had a couple of questions, but the primary one I wanted to ask you was how you define border security. That's my primary question.
Okay.
I'll let
You want me to go with that one first? Okay.
I'll just leave that one question. That's
Okay. Yeah. So I look at it like this. A country that doesn't have security of its borders doesn't have security. That may mean a physical wall. That may mean fencing. That may mean high technology. Whatever it takes, whatever's smart. That's what I want. Because otherwise, we don't have an ability to rationally, thoughtfully control who comes and goes in and out of our country. And while I think a lot of these folks coming out of Guatemala, El Salvador, and elsewhere in Latin America are seeking an escape from gangs and corruption and violence, and see America as the great shining city on the hill that it is, we need a legal way to deal with that influx. And you can't do that if you have open borders. And when you have open borders, then anybody can cross any time, and we don't know who's coming across. And so then you have both humanitarian crisis at the border, you potentially allowing human trafficking at the border, because there is no border, drug trafficking, you name it. So my view of border security is whatever it takes to make sure America can decide who comes and goes in a thoughtful and safe way is border security. Because again, there are parts of the border you'd never be able to physically build a fence on or a wall. There are parts you can patrol with boats. There are a lot you can do with advanced technology now. And I led a bipartisan delegation down to the border last July and met with the Border Patrol agents, went through every phase of the process. We had a hearing this week in the Energy and Commerce Committee on the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Any given day, snapshot in time, there are 11,000 kids up to 17 years of age in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement that we're paying to care for because they came across the border and are seeking amnesty. They get a couple hundred a day, maybe 100, maybe 300, and then they're trying to place on the other side. It hit a peak of 15,000 at one time. We're at 11,000. If you do a snapshot right today at all the facilities around the country, there are 11,000 just unaccompanied minors in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. When they first come across, by the way, they are taken into custody, I'll say. They're immediately reviewed for medical status, health status. If they can't produce their vaccination card, of course nobody can, nobody has one, they're immediately vaccinated because the last thing we need is an outbreak of some disease. They also get immediate access to mental health services. So they get medical and mental health services right away and then continuous while they're in our care. They're in our care for about 70 days on average. The costs range from $200 to $800 a day. They're in schools that we provide. They can call their parents or family back home and whoever they're going to be placed with. But before we place them, there is a complete FBI background check done on the person to whom this child's going to be turned over to. Because in the wave that came through in 2014, they pushed them out too quickly, and we discovered some of those kids were put into child labor or human trafficking situations. So that's why there's a lag here to get them in. But we have no control who crosses the border along a lot of the southern border, and they just show up, they claim asylum, they are under law given that right, and it can be 10 to 15 years before their asylum case is fully adjudicated. In the meantime, they can be here legally and work. So my view of border security is we just need to be able to manage our borders so we decide in a humane and thoughtful way who's coming and who's going. So, did that answer you?
That helped a lot.
What's that?
That helped.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Come on down.
Thank you so much for being here in our beautiful community. We've worked hard to keep it what it is. And recently I've been getting a lot of those solicitor phone calls, working the scams, and all the Facebook postings that I had no control over or clue of. And I think we have to have some real good education on getting our community aware of the scams. And
which ones are you seeing most?
well, recently it's a personal case, so the most, it's like the only time my phone works is when I get a solicitor call.
Yeah, robocall.
Yeah, and it's just really confusing for a lot of people that are not savvy to the technology. Oh, by the way, I'm Debbie, our house.
Hi, Debbie.
Homegrown.
Excellent. We passed legislation to try and crack down on robocalls. We did a hearing in my committee a year or so ago. My favorite witness was a young guy that had developed an app for your phone called RoboKiller, I think it is. That was a monthly fee. I'm not promoting his product here. But what I like best about it is through artificial intelligence, they can pretty well identify when you were getting a robocall. And this application on your phone would answer it and keep them on the line for like 20 or 30 minutes on their dime, not on yours. I like that, you know, stick it back to them. The challenge we face, and we're going to continue to work on this, is a lot of this activity takes place overseas. And so we can't get at it. If we were on our shores, our laws would more easily apply and we could shut them down, but in the world of the internet, we sometimes don't know where they're coming in from. But we're trying to work with the telephone companies to figure out new strategies to try and block these unwanted calls. Facebook's a little different deal. I did a hearing with Mark Zuckerberg before my committee for 5 hours or so on every topic. And they're trying to police it, but they've got 2 billion users, and I don't know how much stuff gets posted every day, every second. And so they're trying to employ artificial intelligence to weed things out. But that becomes a sticky wicket for them, because it crosses into some statutory issues. Are they a common carrier provider of a service of communication, or have they become an editor of content? And once you're one, not the other, then a whole different set of laws and liabilities apply. And so they're trying. I think they could do better, and Google search could do better. I've met with musicians and artists who complain that their stuff gets ripped off, and when they point out their sites that are ripping them off, it's really hard to get them taken down. And yet when they want to, they can take down the site. We had a case when Facebook was before us of ads selling illegal opioids. That literally one of my colleagues from West Virginia has been hard hit with the opioid crisis more than anywhere in the country. And he had this ad for this site to buy opioids. And so he raised it when Zuckerberg was before the committee. To their credit, by the time Zuckerberg left town that afternoon, all that was taken down. So they can do it when they identify it. But gosh, you'd think on some of these things it'd be real easy to search and identify and just not let them ever go up. It's a challenge of our time with social media and the ability to manipulate what people say or do. That's starting to happen more and more, and then post false things and fake news, the so-called fake news is I think a real challenge for democracy. Facts matter. I have a degree in journalism, and I was trying to get to the facts of issues. But robocalls are real pain. On my own cell phone, I get them all the time, and it usually says a number that looks a lot like mine that says Hood River, Oregon, and I never answer them. I figure if it's somebody I know or really wants to get a hold of me, they'll leave a voicemail, and they never do. So I just let them go, but what a nuisance. We got time for a couple more. 4002.
That's Brad's. Can I take his question?
Sure.
Thanks.
Why not?
Yeah, Chad Walden again.
Yeah.
I read recently in your newsletter that you are calling to make net neutrality permanent legislation. But it was my understanding that we had that at one time and then you voted to take it away. I'm just curious what that is all about.
Yeah.
Net neutrality.
So that's back to that fake news, because we never voted to take it away. So the way it works on net neutrality, so this is where you try and prevent the internet service providers from advantaging their own material over a competitor. That would be called blocking, throttling, even paid prioritization is an issue in that space. And I've had legislation since 2015 to prevent those behaviors. The internet grew up from its inception until 2015 with what's called light touch regulation. It was only during a 2-year period where the type of internet governance I assume you support, based on your question, was in place. And that's where the Obama administration and Chairman Wheeler at the FCC thought that we should go further than the principles upon which the internet was built and actually begin to regulate the internet as if it were a common carrier. In other words, an old school telephone company, which then opened the door for the FCC, this one, the next one, to begin regulating everything about the internet. Now they forbore against all kinds of things. In other words, they said, Title II is a very expansive statute. We're not gonna go regulate over this space. But by classifying as Title II, it did mean they could in the future go regulate everything involving rates and everything else. I think that's too far. You have Facebook today, you have Google today, you have everything you have on the internet today. It all grew up under light touch regulation. And what I found over time is that when you add more and more federal control and permission first, you begin to snuff out innovation. And that's my view on it. So we put forward 3 different bills actually that would prevent the so-called bad behaviors that are out there. But when people come in and talk to me about paid prioritization, as the realtors did recently, what they were really complaining about was the notion that if you search for property, Zillow would come up first. Well, that has nothing to do with net neutrality. Google does that with you buy the placement. That's paid prioritization. Or that their website would load faster. Well, guess what? They probably have a CDN. So they do. They have servers closer to where people are. And that would be allowed under net neutrality. So some of the things people complain about most have nothing to do with net neutrality. But if Comcast or somebody like that is abusing their power, then there are ways to shut them down or make them back off. And by the way, I think the internet community does that pretty rapidly and far more efficiently than any regulator would do. And you still have the Federal Trade Commission that can step in and stop that kind of activity, and has done so. But I'm just not a big fan of treating the internet as if it were an old telephone company regulation. So that's the difference. Yeah. Okay, we have time for one more. 4033. Come on down, sir. Oh, what number is yours? No, 4033. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll make you the last one. 4023 after him. Yes, sir.
Alan Parks from Fort Rock.
Good morning.
I thought you would have, or I think you've heard about these comments for 100 times, but the payment in lieu taxes and SRS.
Skilled schools.
And we're about 80% public land in Lake County, and obviously a small population. And what I think I understand about the formula, it's based quite a bit on population.
Yeah.
And, certainly in the road circumstance, we have quite a few miles of roads, and our allocation is is a little weak. So what can be done both to increase that and to make it permanent?
Yeah, and I've supported full pill funding every time I've had a chance in the Congress. This is payment in lieu of taxes. This is the funding that comes to local governments in lieu of the lands being on the tax rolls. And I think it's fully funded at its top authorized level right now. We got that done a few years ago and have been able to maintain that, which is important. You are right on the formula. It skews against less populated areas. It's a very complex formula. And as you might imagine, if you're there are two ways to address it. One, you can increase the amount and then adjust the formula and hold everybody harmless. Or two, you have to round up the votes to adjust the formula, which means you're going to take some away from those that get it today. And that's pretty hard to do. There are discussions going on, I think, in the National Association of Counties, because really it's something they're going to need to come together on, because if they're divided, Congress is never going to be able to sort it out. But it is something I've raised because it is a problem for counties in our district. The first goal is we got to keep it funded. So that's always the priority, but there is work being done at the National Association of Counties to look at the formula and the inequities of the formula. On secure rural schools, so this is the one we created back in about 2000 to bring funding to replace lost timber revenues. I've voted for that everyone I'm the only one left in the delegation that every one of the SRS funding bills that became law I voted for. Now some of that's because they were on other bills and there were other issues the other members had. The last two extensions of that, I'm going to claim some amount of credit for because I worked directly with then Speaker Boehner and then Speaker Ryan, and they agreed to put extensions into other bills. And I probably don't have the same relationship with Speaker Pelosi that I had with Speaker Ryan and Speaker Boehner. But I think for Lake County, I've got that number here somewhere, but it was 17 million over 2 years, I think. It's either 7 or 17. I'll tell you what, Nick, all those fell apart, but I think it's in there. But it's running out. And so we need to, again, look at how we're going to fund SRS. Now, the rules in Congress are you got to go find a way to pay for it. So we've paid for it before with everything from selling off helium supplies on federal ground, which actually needed to be done, but used the revenue, to capturing revenue from roll-your-own cigarette companies. So there's a cigarette tax, right? But roll-your-own wasn't taxed. And somebody created a company to do roll-your-own and trying to escape the tax. And we put them back in and used that revenue. So you're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel. I think in the last round, we sold off some of the strategic oil reserve to help pay for it. And I had jurisdiction over that. I'm now not chairman of the committee. So we're trying to find different ways, but it's a challenge. Now our senators have come up with a plan to create a permanent trust fund and fund it with billions, I think $6 billion, and then you'd live off the proceeds. But I don't think they've identified the way to get the $6 billion in initially. But it would be nice to have a stabilized fund where we don't have to wrestle around as a delegation or a region. Nobody was hurt more nor benefited more from reduction in timber harvest than frankly Oregon. And nobody benefited more from SRS than Oregon. And so we're a small state and trying to rally the votes is always, but we've been able to get it done. And I think we will going forward. But again, we get back to active management, generate more jobs and revenue locally, that would be a piece that would help as well. So. Oh, I'm sorry. Secure Rural Schools was 3.7 million, not 17 and not 7. Yeah, over 2 years, 3.7. Yeah. All right, sir, we're going to let you wrap it up. Good morning. Oh, no, this was
First of all, I want to thank you for coming all that way from Washington. I know that's a long trip, and it was probably even a longer trip coming from Hood River.
That's where I go tonight, so.
I had a chance to look over campaign financing, and and looked through some data, and I was startled to see that your largest contributor to your campaign in 2017, 2018 is the pharmaceutical industry. And I'm startled to see that because I know that you talked a lot about lowering drug prices.
And we have.
And working on the opioid crisis.
Yes, sir.
So I wonder, first of all, I have two questions. One is, was one of those Purdue Pharma?
No.
They didn't contribute to you?
No, they contributed to Senator Walden, but not to me.
The second question is that I'm really curious if you have any insight as to why the big pharma contributed so much money to your campaign when you campaigned on the basis of lowering drug prices and in fact fighting the opioid crisis, when in fact that crisis was caused largely by the pharmaceutical industry and they profited by millions and millions of dollars from it.
That's correct. And so we did take them on, and I appreciate the question. All I ever owe anybody that contributes to my campaign is a thank you, period. And that's all they get, is a thank you. And you have to be able to serve in public office and keep that firewall, and I do. And if you go to my website, you can find our 380-page investigative report that looked at the pharmaceutical companies, that looked at the distributors, that looked at, and by the way, I put the CEOs of all the distributors under oath before our subcommittee on oversight investigation. Everybody played a role, and Purdue was the worst of the lot. And our investigation went after Purdue. There were a lot of, I would encourage anybody, you can go to my website and find it. We did a 2+ year investigation of what went wrong with the opioids crisis. And yeah, the pharmaceutical company, you can blame them, but guess what? Every pharmaceutical that you get starts with a prescription. And there was over-prescribing. And then there were pill mills, where the distributors with the ARCOS data should have known and were supposed to know, and supposed to report, that too many pills were going to, they had towns in West Virginia of 400 people where 4 million pills went in. And nobody did anything about it. And we went after it. And we had all the drug distributor company heads there. And then we looked at the prescribing, we looked at the whole, the DEA, why they didn't use stop orders and should have. So I recommend, because I know you like to investigate these things, go look at our report. And then look at our legislation, what we did as well, to try and get at every phase of this, to get medical assisted treatment so that people can get off this addiction, to shut down the pill mills. Part of what we did was beef up the access of fentanyl coming into the country from China through our mail processing facilities. I sent my subcommittee chairman up to New Jersey to look at it. We were not staffed up, didn't have what we needed, and basically fentanyl, which is 100 times the strength of morphine, was coming in through mail processing facilities. And so we put legislation in there on that. We passed 60 different laws that affect every phase of this. Now, drug prices. No administration has done more than this one is attempting to do to bring down drug prices. I'm working very closely with the Secretary of HHX, Azar. And they're putting forward one proposal after another that's driving the pharmaceutical companies crazy, and I'm supporting them every step of the way. But it's more than just the drug manufacturers. It is the PBMs that are in the middle of this. It's the whole value chain. And we're going after all of it. And so I know the comment you made at the beginning was on finance. That's fine, that's my campaign, I'll take that hit. All I ever owe anybody is a thank you. But when we rewrote the generic drug law, which we did under my watch at the FDA, this FDA put more generics into the market than in any time in history in that period of a year or more. Pfizer alone lost $23 billion because we sped up the generic approval process. Now they can only give me 5. In a primary of 5 and a 10. And I don't care. Because I'll tell you what, when people can't get their drugs because they can't pay for them at the drug counter, something's wrong. And we're going to go after it, and we are. We're going to do it on a bipartisan basis. Because we need to. And it doesn't stop there. It's the hospitals, it's the doctors, it's pharma, it's the distributors. It's every piece of this value chain. And we have to go after it all. And by the way, they all contribute. They contribute to virtually all of us. But that ain't going to stop me from being independent and going after them where they're wrong. And I will hold them accountable, and I have. So, I appreciate you raising that. Thank you for coming out. If I didn't draw your number, we got through a lot of them. I think we've got, did we put the sheets out front? Leave a question. Glad to get back. And again, yes, sir.
Mr. Walden, I have a couple comments I'd like to make if you have the time.
I'll come over to you when I wrap this up. How's that? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate you being out today.